Today's lesson is Vacationing Among the Stars. Hello, everyone. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're talking about taking a trip to the stars, just like Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did back in 1969. They went to the moon. But they weren't space tourists. They were actually scientists. They were pilots, actually, conducting lots of scientific experiments. And they weren't going there for fun. It was part of their mission.
But these days, it seems like it's going to be possible very soon for regular people like us to go into space and to have a holiday there, to vacation among the stars. When I saw this title at first, I thought it meant that the article was going to be about Hollywood, that we were going to talk about vacationing among the famous actors and actresses, the stars. But no, we're actually talking about the stars in space. And it's interesting to think that just 100 years ago, we first started flying commercially. Before that, people were going places by ship. And then around 1914, that's when people first began taking commercial flights. And travel time really reduced because of that, became a lot shorter. And now we're talking about traveling to space to go on a holiday, which is very, very interesting.
It's very interesting. Remember, Americans say they're going on vacation or they're taking a vacation. British people will say they're going on a holiday or having a holiday. But in this particular case, we're actually turning the word vacation into a verb, to vacation among the stars, to take a vacation among the stars, to have a holiday in outer space. So is that possible? Can we jump on a rocket someday and fly up into Earth's orbit and float like the astronauts do on missions to the International Space Station? Hey, that would be a lot of fun. You might get seasick or airsick, I guess, if you do that. But hey, maybe some people would like to do that. So let's find out about the future of space travel for regular folks. Let's dive right into this and listen to the first part.
In 1961, the Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person in space. So back in 1961, the Russian cosmonaut, and here when we talk about cosmonaut, we're just talking about an astronaut, but cosmonaut refers to an astronaut in the Russian space program. So this cosmonaut became the first person in space. So it wasn't an American, it was a Russian, and it happened in 1961. That wasn't very long ago.
Not when you think about it. If you know someone who was born in that year, you might think, oh, that person's really, really old. But in terms of, all of history, 1961 was basically just a couple of seconds ago in terms of the history of the Earth. Today, more than 550 people have ventured beyond Earth's atmosphere by rocket. So that's a lot of people. 550 people have gone to space. We're describing this as them being or them having ventured into space. To venture in this particular case means to take an adventure, to move in that direction, to basically go there. So they have gone beyond Earth's atmosphere. That's, of course, the layer of air that is all around the Earth. And most people say it's about 100 miles thick. And so if you've gone up higher than 100 miles, then you have been into space. And most people, of course, go there by rocket. There doesn't seem to be any other way to go up there.
Yes, and the verb to venture can also mean to go to a place that's really exciting or that's dangerous or that's potentially unpleasant. And that's really true for the atmosphere beyond Earth's surface because it is exciting to travel there and it's potentially dangerous because it's a trip that not many people have taken. And it could be unpleasant, the feeling of being in a rocket and traveling so fast in the air up into space could feel very strange. So here the word venture is used very appropriately. I could also say I would rather stay at home and eat instant noodles than to venture out to a restaurant during a typhoon. So in this case, a typhoon or really bad weather would be an unpleasant experience. So I prefer not to venture out into that situation.
Yes, similarly, my mother used to say, don't be foolish and venture out during a blizzard. Of course, a blizzard is a very strong snowstorm. So, yes, I was not going to venture out of the house during a blizzard, or especially here in Taiwan, do not venture out of the house during a typhoon. But, of course, lots of people have been past the atmosphere. In fact, since the year 2000, there has been a continuous human presence aboard the International Space Station, or ISS for short. So, yes, the International Space Station has been up there since the year 2000, maybe a little bit before that, but there have been people there continuously since that time. So, for over 20 years, there has always been someone up in the International Space Station, whether they're American or Israeli or Russian, there's always been someone there to mind the house.
Yes, and continuous here just means to happen without stopping. You can talk about a continuous noise. For instance, the continuous noise from the apartment upstairs from my house just kept me awake all night because that noise just wouldn't stop. It was a continuous noise. And here, there has been a continuous human presence aboard the International Space Station because over these years, people just have been going there and coming back. There has been a continuous flow of traffic.
And the next sentence says, these residents, however, are almost always scientists and engineers doing important jobs. So, yes, indeed, they do go to the International Space Station and they stay there for a while, so we could describe them as residents. But they're not tourists, okay? They're almost always scientists and engineers doing important jobs. It costs lots and lots of money to send those people up there to the ISS. So, of course, governments need to invest wisely. So, yes, indeed, they hire the best people. They have to be scientists and engineers. They can't be football players or somebody like that. That's pretty useless.
Yes, only a very select few have been able to travel to space as a tourist. So even though most of the people who travel to space, to the International Space Station, have been people who are there for a purpose to keep the space station running or to conduct experiments, sometimes they have allowed a few people to travel to the ISS to observe what's going on. People who are not specialists, who shouldn't really be there. And these are the select few. So select few means few people who have been carefully chosen from a large group. So they're not going to choose just anybody who expresses interest in seeing the ISS. Usually it's someone who probably has a lot of money or has a lot of power or is in a position that is well established in society. And if they express interest in seeing the ISS and traveling to space, in a few occasions they have allowed these people on the journey.
Yep, they are the ones who get to go. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now and talk about some of these wealthy millionaires who've been able to go up there.
So before we mentioned that only a select few have been allowed to travel into space with the pilots and the scientists who go into space to perform their duties. There have been a few people who were allowed to go along on this trip. And one of these people is a businessman or was a businessman. And it says here, the first ever space tourist was a wealthy businessman named Dennis Tito, who paid a reported US $20 million for a visit to the ISS on a Russian spacecraft in 2001.
So we're describing people who go up into space for fun, usually very rich people, as space tourists, okay? And yes, he paid that large amount of money so he could go to the ISS, but he went on a Russian spacecraft and he did that in 2001. Maybe Russia was kind of strapped for cash or something like that, so they said, sure, you can tag along, just give us $20 million and you can come along with us. Now, just 6 other space tourists have made similar journeys in the past 20 years, or in the 20 years since then. And considering the cost of the trip, it's not difficult to see why. So only 6 people have gone up into space as tourists. And they haven't really gone up that far, actually. If you know how far up the International Space Station is, it's only just slightly above the Earth's atmosphere. It's not like going to the moon or Mars or something like that. It's just kind of jumping up into the air a little bit. But still, that is a special privilege that these people, of course, are going to brag about. So only 6 people have done that. And so considering the cost of the trip, it's not difficult to see why. So when you think about how much these trips cost, then it's not difficult to see why the number is so low. You've got to be really, really rich to do it.
That's right. Whoever can pay US $20 million to go on this trip means that they have a lot of money. And not many people have that much money. And Dennis Tito and 6 other people were among these people who have traveled to the ISS and have had this incredible experience.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the second paragraph. Let's move on now to the third part and continue to talk about space tourism.
With the exception of the one in Russia, national space agencies have been notoriously reluctant to take tourists to space, preferring to fill the seats in their shuttles with scientists. So we saw before that the Russian spacecraft in 2001 was willing to take Dennis Tito, a space tourist, with them on this trip. But that was in Russia. That was a Russian spacecraft. So that spacecraft was an exception. So an exception is a thing or a person that is different from other things or people, so they cannot be included in a general statement. So in general, the fact is most national space agencies have been notoriously reluctant. To be reluctant means you are unwilling to do something. So most national space agencies are unwilling to or are reluctant to take tourists to space. So in that sense, the Russian Space Agency is an exception because it was willing to take Dennis Tito into space with it.
Yep, the one person or the one country that does not have to follow the rule is the exception. I could say, for example, everybody has to stay after school today. No exceptions. Everybody has to say, I don't care what kind of excuse you have. Everybody has to stay after school. No exceptions. But here, most space agencies in the world don't want to send these space tours up there. They're reluctant. If you're reluctant, you don't want to do it. We've all been reluctant at various times in our lives. Somebody asked us to go to a party, but I don't know anybody there, and I'm kind of shy, and I don't really like drinking alcohol, and I don't like loud music, so I'm really reluctant to go, even though everybody expects me to go. But in this particular case, most of these space agencies are reluctant to send people up there, with the exception of Russia. As I suggested, maybe they don't mind a little extra money or something like that. And yes, these space agencies like NASA or whatever want to fill those seats in their shuttles with scientists. And shuttles, of course, are ships that go from one place to another. Of course, here in Taiwan, you've got lots of hotels with airport shuttles, a bus that will take you from your hotel to the airport.
Yes, so because of the situation, even for those with money, even for those who have money, opportunities were limited because most space agencies did not want to take people who weren't scientists, engineers. It didn't matter if you had a lot of money, you're still not going to get a seat on the shuttle.
Indeed. So even for those with the money, opportunities were limited, but things are changing. In recent years, 3 companies have entered into a modern space race to make space tourism a real commercial possibility for private customers. So I guess it's getting easier and easier to send ships into space. You don't need to rely on NASA or the European Space Agency or the Chinese or whoever. You don't need to rely on those space agencies to send people into space. Hey, some of these companies are private companies and they're sending people up there to make money. They are in this for the money, like tour companies are. If they send you on a cruise of the Caribbean Sea, that's a tourism company, agency, I guess. So that's what these companies are doing with space tourists. And I suppose they can make a lot of money there because lots of people would like to have bragging rights to say, hey, I've been to outer space. Top that.
Right. And here, the phrase enter into just means to begin. And here we talk about a modern space race as opposed to the original space race, which happened in the 1950s. And it was mainly a race between Russia and the United States because they were competing with each other to try to get the first man into space, to go onto the moon, or to travel far beyond Earth's atmosphere. That was the original space race. But now we're talking about a different kind of space race, a modern one, and it involves sending private customers, people who are willing to pay, into space as an adventure for fun.
Right, so they're entering into a space race. So they're all competing against each other. And they're going to have to, of course, offer the best prices for people and the best package deal. Maybe they'll send them into space not just for 1 hour, but maybe 2 hours. And they'll include a spacewalk or something like that. And who knows, eventually they might even let people walk on the moon. And yes, it's going to be a real commercial possibility for private customers. We've got billionaires all over the world willing to go and be the first kid on their block to say, hey, I've been among the stars. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program. And please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.